Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the NCDIT Completing Access to Broadband, or CAB, mapping webinar for counties. My name's Crystal Dickerson. I'm the Communications Manager for the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity, and I'm joined today by several folks from the Broadband Infrastructure Office, as well as someone from the Center for Geographic Information and Analysis. Today, we have a lot of content that we will be providing. So what we ask is that you please enter your questions in the chat or Q&A. If we have time at the end, we will answer them. If not, in the coming weeks, we will be putting out additional information and guidance for you ahead of this program launch. So please know that we will take everything that you submit and incorporate that into what we're putting out. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Angie Bailey, the Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office.
Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well today. Thank you for joining us. We know that you all are extremely busy. If y'all are like us, we are working to push out as much work as possible before the end of the year. So we appreciate you being here. We are recording today, so we will be posting this on our website and hope that y'all will share this with the relevant folks on your team. So for the CAB program, as you know, we've been working hard to finalize a lot in the mapping space, and that's what will allow us to finally launch the CAB program, our CAB projects. So I really want to thank, there's a lot to it. I really want to thank Ben Shelton from the Center for Geographic Information and Analysis, which is one of our sister offices at DIT, for all of his work with mapping. And Stephanie Jane Edwards, who is our broadband data and mapping lead for the Broadband Infrastructure Office, and they have both been working extremely hard on all of this. So let's run through what we're going to cover today. Crystal, if you could go to the next slide, please. So we have some quick program updates that I'll provide. We're going to talk about the broadband funding, the new broadband funding map that was published last week, that kind of shows all the protected areas. So if a project is funded with federal, state, or local dollars, generally that becomes a protected area and we can't invest other funds. So Ben's going to touch base on that. We will talk about the CAB planning tool and the CAB eligible locations, which are reflected in that tool. We'll talk about the protest process for CAB, which is a process for broadband providers if they serve an area that shows as being unserved. We're going to talk about how both providers and counties can submit data to us through our new AWS folders. We're going to talk about a little bit about county prioritization for CAB if you want to prioritize certain areas in your counties. A little bit on how broadband providers will submit project areas for CAB scopes of work, and then a little bit on cost-plus licenses. So it's a lot to cover, but again, this today is meant to be a high-level overview to kind of have you all start absorbing all these pieces. And then we are actually planning to do another webinar on December 18th, which you may not know about yet. That will be 9:30 to 10:30 also, and that'll be on some more of the programmatic steps. So again, we had to have kind of this mapping work finalized before we can get into receiving bids for county projects. And as you all may know, previously we've been mapping our projects against Address NC, which is our 911 data. We've had to translate that to the new FCC broadband serviceable locations. That has been a huge task. And so now that that's being finalized, we can, we're moving to the next steps. We do have a handful of great grants that are still contingent awards. We like to have the awards contracted before we move forward into new projects, but we hope to resolve those this month. One difference with CAB is that because it's a procurement, so we will be releasing these individual scopes of work for each county that wants to participate. Because it's a procurement, once that award is made, it's basically contracted right then. Whereas with great grants, that was a grant process. Contracting was a little bit different, and it's taken a fair amount of time to get everything contracted. So CAB, we expect to be quicker in that sense. What we're talking about today, we are in the process of kind of writing up all these explanations. We will republish that in our CAB guidance in the coming weeks. So we'll ask y'all to look for that. Our target today, our audience today is for county managers and whoever they asked to join them. We did a session for broadband providers on Friday. Same content, but just we thought they may have different questions than what you all have. And then again, we'll have the webinar on the 18th on kind of programmatic updates. That will be counties and providers that wish to attend. Next slide, please. So quickly on kind of our CAB program updates. As you know, we have to pre-qualify broadband providers for CAB. I should probably at least spell out CAB once, the Completing Access to Broadband program. So we had issued the RFP over the summer. We had providers submit applications to us to pre-qualify. Those decisions have been made, and so we're working on getting that final it's a convenience contract awarded. And then we'll be sharing a list with you all in the counties of which broadband providers are eligible to participate. Other broadband providers can participate in the protected area and protest process. So that's why we had a wider audience on our Friday webinar. So the pre-qualification is moving forward. We just need the contract, convenience contract finalized. Let's see. And next slide, please, Crystal. And so also on Friday, we sent through the 100 county managers an email about the NCDIT county collaboration process. And so we know you all have been working with us, with Jeff Brooks specifically on our team. I want to thank Jeff for all of his outreach to the counties on kind of CAB and how it will work. This email Friday was meant to kind of outline the immediate steps we need from the counties to move forward. And so if you plan to participate in CAB, there is a county commitment form that we sent out, and it just has the up to amount of what amount of funding you all that you have available, and the funding source. So we will need that back from counties that wish to participate. Shannon Gerger on our team is collecting those. For those of you that have that are partners in Great Grant projects, you have probably worked with Shannon on the Great Grant contracts. So that was sent out. The next step is kind of us finalizing the county level scope of work document. And what's an important piece of that is the evaluation criteria for these projects. So we will be getting that out to you in the coming weeks and seeing what feedback you have, especially on the evaluation criteria. And then when we talk about kind of prioritization of project areas, the evaluation criteria is where we will kind of see, hey, this county wants this area prioritized, you know, and how that fits into the scoring. So we'll be talking with you more on that. And then we've also asked counties to select their evaluation team members. If you want to have up to 2 members on the evaluation team for your scope. For a review of your scope, we would need those names. So those were the asks in that email. And I will turn it over to Ben in just a second. Just one more thing on timing. So what we're working on right now is kind of how many CAB projects we can push out, bids we can push out, and awards made between January and May or June. That's kind of our goal, is for everyone that's ready to get as much pushed out as possible. We know that there's some have, I think we've got about 30 or so that we've been tracking that seem ready to go. And so we will be looking at that order, but at the same time, we're trying to do multiple counties at once. And it will depend somewhat on how quickly you all can get some of these steps back to us. So that's kind of where we are on timing. So yeah, so thanks for being here. Ben, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. So just to start off, I wanted to kind of highlight our NC1 map website. If you haven't been there, definitely check it out, nc1map.gov. And if you go to the top of that main screen and go to under data projects, there's a broadband initiatives page there. And it's also, lower down on the main page there, you'll see a broadband link. Everything we're doing and everything we're talking about today, we're putting through that NC1 map broadband page, for you all to ingest either as streaming services, downloadable products, online mapping tools. We're trying to give everyone as many options as possible to use and leverage the data that we're creating. So in particular, about halfway down that broadband page, what we're trying to focus on today here is the planning section. And in that planning section, we've made quite a few updates recently. There is first on the left there, you'll see there's a North Carolina broadband funding card. That's our new map that we put together that kind of details all of the funding programs and how we've crosswalked it into that FCC location data. And I'll get into the kind of crosswalk process here in a little bit. So on that funding card, there's two buttons there. There's a data button and a view button. The data will take you just straight into the data tables. These are all of the locations that we are saying are funded in the CostQuest FCC location fabric. And the view button is kind of more of a visualization tool that you can go in, see the data on the map, and download the data as well from the same source as what the data button would take you to. And then we have the CAB planning tool in the middle. That's kind of going to be our main tool going forward for identifying project areas, seeing where the unserved and underserved locations are, seeing where previous funded projects are, and defining kind of the eligible areas going in through CAB, and how we can prioritize and do that and communicate between the counties and the state. That CAB planning tool is going to be very key in doing that kind of function. And also, before we move off this page, right at the top of the broadband page, there are some PDF maps, county by county PDF maps, the county profiles. Those have been updated with the latest release of the FCC data. I'm hopeful to update them one more time to kind of tweak them for the policy lens that Stephanie Jane will talk about and the different technology types. And update those numbers to reflect what's going to be eligible in the CAB planning tool here shortly. So those county profile maps should be updated by the end of the day, hopefully today. So you can download any county in the state and get some quick statistics and an overview of how broadband is being serviced. Next slide, please. So if you click that view button on the broadband funding map, this is where it'll take you. It's kind of just a quick view, a visualization of all of the different broadband funding programs through the state and federal programs, all in one spot. You'll see the polygons in this map are what we have downloaded from the FCC's funding map. So this is coming straight from the federal government on their various federal programs like the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund or the Reconnect program. No matter what program it was, we've pulled down that data from their funding map and mapped it here into this interface. But what the purpose of this map is really is to show the actual FCC or CostQuest location fabric, the BSLs, the broadband serviceable locations. We'll probably say BSL a lot in this presentation, so just know that's what that term means, is that's the FCC's location data. And so what we've tried to do is take all of the programs, whether it's state or federal, and move them into the BSLs. Because if we're defining project areas going forward in BSLs, we need to know which ones that we need to not double fund. So if it's already received funding in a previous program, then we can't direct new funds to it in a new program. So first step that we've done here, and we've taken a lot of time, is try to crosswalk everything from these older data sets, whether it was address NC, census blocks, parcels, or whatever the previous program was done in, and move them over into the broadband serviceable location data set. So then we're in a common baseline data set that we can define projects going forward. And in this map, you'll see the map at the top, but at the bottom, you'll see the two tables. It's state and funded locations and federal funded locations. And the little icon that I've kind of has the red square around it, has a couple options where you can filter these tables, see things by county, see things by program, or even by grantee, and download those data sets in a tabular format. So what you'll be downloading, since the FCC's data is a licensed product, the CostQuest data is, what we're able to provide is the location IDs. And if you have a license locally, you can take those location IDs and join them with the data set on your end. We're not able to provide out and distribute publicly the geometry and all of the information behind the fabric, but we can distribute the location IDs that we're kind of conveying back and forth to the counties. We do not have currently right now any local projects. So what we are missing from this map, if there are local funded projects that we do not know about, then we are not currently mapping those. And that's kind of where we're coming into this webinar and asking if you know of local projects that we're missing from this data and from this map. Going through the CAB process, we're going to have to identify those locations that are funded through those local projects and also make those ineligible for future funding. So if there's something missing on this map, please let us know. Next slide, please. Another way you can get to the data, like I mentioned at the very top, the data button on that federal fund or the broadband funding card, you can view tabular views of the data and you can filter that data using the button I've highlighted here. You can filter on any of the fields in that table, both for the federal and for the state funded table. Next slide, please. And once you've filtered that data, if you toggle that filter at the top under the download options, then you can download subsets of it. If you're only looking at one county, you can download it just for that county by making sure you're filtering first and then downloading. If you have issues with this, we've also put this up in our cloud in our AWS server. And the last arrow at the bottom there is pointing to just a direct download where you can download both tables and full data sets all at once at one time. It's probably a little quicker download option. So we wanted to provide as many options as possible in case certain things work better at your office than others. Next slide. And now getting into kind of what we've been doing the past few months to get all of this data from these different programs over into the BSLs. I just wanted to give a couple examples of how we crosswalk this data going forward and how we'll continue to crosswalk it. So some of the earlier rounds of the GREAT grant program that we performed over the 2018, 2019, we've already received final builds. So if those projects were defined, and those projects were defined in census blocks back then, we've moved on from census blocks. When the providers built out to certain locations, they gave us the final builds that we validated to ensure that they were within their grant area. We used all that final build data to then crosswalk into the BSLs using the statewide parcel data set as kind of an intermediary step. So when we took the points, we intersected them with the parcels in that county for that award, and then we selected any of the BSLs that were in those parcels. And so that's kind of an automated scripted routine that we performed, but then we would go through and visually validate it using a map similar to this. So we color coded the parcels based on how many BSLs and how many addresses were on each parcel. As you can see, the pink triangles are the actual BSL fabric locations. The dots, the orange dots in the map are a final build that was submitted to us by a provider that built out that area. And then we took the parcels, and the green parcels are kind of the easy one-to-one matches. There was one BSL and there was one build location. And so that's a quick, easy crosswalk. But as you can tell, with a lot of these data sets being, they're available for different uses. Addresses, the BSLs are more focused on broadband serviceable locations. So what you see there in purple these are parcels that have a difference in the number of BSLs and addresses on that parcel. So we have to kind of visually validate what's going on, make a determination if this is a valid BSL for that project. And then you see the red parcels. Those are builds that were submitted, but there are no fabric locations. Many of these may end up going into our bulk fabric challenge process. So we could take those, validate that they should be a BSL, and then submit them to CostQuest as a challenge and get them added to the map in the future. But some of these may just have different purposes and may not have an equivalent BSL. So going forward, that's okay. We are still going to track all those projects in the original data set that they were initiated and contracted in. But for future projects, we just need to know if there's something on that parcel that needs to be made ineligible for future funding. The next slide, please. So if we do not have build data that has been submitted to us, if it's just a grant award and we know it's a grant award, this example here is a census block that was awarded in the area. Well, we don't have build data. We don't know which exact parcels they've built to meet their contractual obligations. So we just go back to the award data and use that census block and kind of do a quick selection of everything in that census block. And those are the BSLs that are made ineligible for future funding until we get the final build data. So when we get final build data for this area, we'll go back through, do the crosswalk again, and see if there's locations that need to be released for future funding. So if there's 100 locations in this census block and they're only contractually obligated to build to 80, well, those other 20 BSLs will then be released for future funding once we get the final build data. And all of this is using version 3. I just wanted to note version 3 of the broadband serviceable locations was released back in July. So there's they released the fabric, but then the availability data just came online a couple weeks ago. So we're using version 3 for everything we're doing, which should make us kind of have a static data set for the next 6 months. Next slide, please. Grant rounds 2, 3, and a most recent ARPA funded grant round that we performed through the last couple of years. Those used a mixture of parcel data or address NC data. And I just kind of wanted to highlight, so we don't really have build data for those, and just like with that census block example, we're going back to the award data, what's in the contract. And if it's address NC like this example, we're taking those green points, which are address NC awarded locations, using that same kind of parcel crosswalk process, and selecting the parcels that intersect those addresses, and then using that selection to then select the BSLs. And those BSLs then get the information of that grant put onto them, and they're made ineligible. And then as we get build data, just like in the past example, this may narrow and some of these locations may release, but I think the grant award being more specific will have a lot less of that than when we had census block project definitions. Next slide, please. And then again, it's not always going to be a one-to-one crosswalk. It's a very messy process. It takes a lot of time to go through and visually validate all of this. So I just wanted to show an example of the parcel here in orange. There are 2 award locations in address NC on that parcel, but there's only 1 BSL. So there are going to be differences in the numbers of locations being crosswalked. But the point is that the parcel is still being protected. So everything on that parcel is protected, whether there's 1 BSL or 10 BSLs, it's being protected. And then if the example at the bottom of the screen there, the red point, the red parcel, there is no BSL. So in those, we are still going to track those going forward in case a location gets added to the fabric in future versions. But for now, there's just nothing to crosswalk to. We just move on and document it. Next slide, please. And the federal awards. So all the examples I've been showing have been all of our state programs. The federal awards are a lot more direct and a lot more straightforward because all of those are kind of polygon-based award areas. Most of them are census block, like the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. What we are doing in those instances, we are taking the data from the federal funding map, which is all census block and polygons, and intersecting it with the BSLs and creating an ineligible layer from that intersection. What we asked the providers on Friday is if they know that these projects are not serving the entire area and they're more narrow than what the FCC's data is showing, to communicate that to us so that we can release those extra locations for funding in future programs. So if we get any of that data, we'll refine this. But currently what we had to do is just kind of take the polygons that were given to us through the FCC funding map and intersect them with everything in the BSLs. So that's what this example is showing.
Ben, can I have one point?
Sure.
Sorry. I just want to make sure the counties understand. So for the crosswalking between the great federal awards, this that we have made, that Ben's been describing, when we report to U.S. Treasury, we'll report to NC Pro every month and then to U.S. Treasury every quarter. So we've been talking with Treasury about how to provide these BSL locations for our great federal awards. I think Treasury knows that this is a challenge, that they've put this ARPA money out before these BSLs were available from the FCC. So I just wanted you to know that that's something we're aware of. I think we've talked with you about it, but we will this data that Ben is describing is what we will eventually provide to Treasury. Right now, their portal doesn't seem to accept some of the format that we Ben can talk about this more. I'll just say we're working with them, and so we wanted you to be aware of that because I know you all have Treasury reporting requirements too.
Right, and we're trying to find mechanisms and mapping ways of distributing, the locations in BSLs that you can then report as well, so that we're reporting the same things for the same projects. And yeah, it's a challenge since, like I said, there could be 100 locations or 1,000 locations that we have defined in addresses, but then when you translate it into the BSLs, there's not 1,000. I mean, I guarantee every time it'll be less. And so how to report that to U.S. Treasury when our contracts say 1,000? How do you report 1,000 to the Treasury when they're in a data set that doesn't have 1,000 locations in that area? So it is challenging, and we're still kind of working throughout that process. But I will say that none of this would be possible without our awesome GIS community in this state. All the great parcel data that we've gathered through the statewide parcel data set through the transformer, all the addresses coming through the Next Gen 911 process, all of the imagery that we've collected through the 911 board's ortho imagery program, the building footprint from emergency management that we're working on updating as well for the state. Just all of these great data sets in this North Carolina GIS community has really made this possible. Whereas, we wouldn't have to go out to a commercial provider and get some sort of commercial data set or things like that for a lot of this crosswalk process. We have all this great data. So I just, while I had a chance, say thank you, because the last 2 months have been painful, but they would have been a lot more painful without all of that great data already in place. Next slide, please. And then I will turn it over to Stephanie Jane to get kind of a little bit more in the details of the CAB going forward.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning, everybody. I cannot see your faces, but it's always good to be with you talking about how we can get access to all the corners of all of our counties. The protected areas that Ben's been describing from the funding map are going to be enhanced with input from our internet service providers across the state, and we're going to be seeking information on any corrections that may need to be made based on the crosswalk process that we have a high level of confidence in, but has many caveats. So as you can expect, there may be some omissions or corrections, and we just want to double check. And also those locally funded project areas that we were just talking about, we can use your help to be alerted to those projects. As I've put in the chat, there's some information that you could email to us or contact us with, and we should be able to take it from there, coordinating with the funded internet service provider and their licensed access to the location level data about those projects to get those areas mapped in order to protect those areas and then channel this new funding to parts of your county that didn't already receive that funding. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that any of those locations, as been mentioned before, that may have been outside of the scope of a federally funded project, maybe it was built afterward and not included in the contract, or there was an agreement about only a certain percentage of locations within that protected area, we have an opportunity to hear on that from the internet service providers who were funded and deploying that service. So we'll be getting location level data on that from the internet service providers and some additional supporting documentation to confirm that the changes should be made. They will be using the same secure file upload system that I will describe to you here in a minute that counties can also use in the CAB program. If you could go to the next slide, Crystal. This is the CAB planning tool that Ben was describing that would be available through our broadband page on NC1 Map. And this is a really great place to start and something we expect to serve as a one-stop shop for brainstorming and strategizing on the CAB program. And I just wanted to make sure you were aware of a few features of this map, that there's a bird's eye view of broadband availability gaps across the state. We've kind of added a highlight here of the piece from the legend that explains these colorful splotches as they go toward increasing shades of intensity pink. That's like higher counts of unserved locations within this shape that's a small hexagon cell. As they go deeper shades of blue, that's a higher percentage of unserved locations that are found within that hexagon. And then as they come together to make purple, then that means you've got a high count and percentage of unserved homes or businesses within that hexagon. And on top of that, we have that data that is also in our broadband funding map for broader purposes, but in the CAB planning tool, you're seeing the protected areas that have received funding. So this is the map where eligible locations at the location level will be added soon, and you'll need to zoom way in to see that. We're finalizing and double checking that data, but that should be added very soon. And that is the information that internet service providers will be invited to protest or to suggest corrections to based on their records. And one other thing I wanted to point out is these tabs across the bottom. Those are new for any of you who've already been checking out this map. You have the main view here that includes funded areas, including our great grant funded areas and all that, but you can switch to different tabs that highlight the footprints of specific technology types. So if you want to take a look at where fiber is specifically available, or cable wireline infrastructure, or fixed wireless, you can do that with these tabs. If you could go to the next slide, though, I'll show you how in the top right-hand corner, as with most of our maps, you can select a county and then zoom in directly to your county of interest. And more layers pop up when you do that are available and not as easy to see when you're at the state scale. So this is Burke County, and it shows you an example of how in Morganton there in the center, you've got higher percentages, higher counts of unserved locations within those hexagons, and that's why it's highlighting as pink splotch. But as you're in maybe some more sparsely populated parts of the county, there may be counts that are lower, but they represent a higher percentage of the overall homes and businesses in those parts of the county. So it can maybe help you brainstorm about your prioritization. And you'll also see these kind of orange and rust dots in the map are our broadband survey data that people can submit information to us individually about lack of broadband access in their home or business. So you can take a look at that, see if that's helpful to you. And the hexagons, the size that these are, can also give you an idea of what the county prioritization scopes will look like when they will also be added to this map. So you'll have kind of every piece of information about the CAB program coming together in this map to inform the next steps. And also, once you're in this county view, you'll see on the right a list of specific internet service provider companies, and you can click on those to bring up a highlighted footprint of where that company is within the county. So that may help with coordination. If you go to the next slide, Thanks, Crystal. We wanted to talk a little bit about some data modifications that will be reflected in the eligibility layer that starts out at the basement level with the availability data that is reported to the FCC, and we get copies of that information at the location level. And then we filter out locations that already have committed funds applied to them so that we don't double fund areas without funding others. And then we add like kind of a policy lens to the various technology types and the scalability information as we know it today. And so you'll see a lot of consistency here with eligibility and how the data is handled from the GREAT grant program over to this round under the same funder. U.S. Treasury is funding both. So fiber to the location is locations that only have fiber to the home or other location is going to be handled as served where the speeds meet or exceed those speed thresholds and performance thresholds of low latency and 100 megabits per second down, 20 megabits per second up. And under ARPA, as you know, there's an emphasis on scalability up to 100 megabits per second symmetrical. Likewise, cable wireline infrastructure, locations that have that access will be qualify as served where those speeds and performance meet the thresholds. DSL served locations will still be unserved in the data, consistent with earlier rounds of ARPA funded work. And unlicensed fixed wireless will also be still unserved and therefore eligible for additional funding. In the category of licensed fixed wireless, there's kind of a newcomer into the data sets that we're receiving, which is licensed fixed wireless delivered over mobile networks. That is still going to be handled as unserved, and reserving the opportunity for additional funding for those locations. And over traditional licensed fixed wireless networks, you'll see the same thing in this particular round of the program. And then licensed by rule, which is getting a little bit into the weeds, but that primarily consists of general access authorization, CBRS, licensed fixed wireless, as opposed to a priority access license, which would be lumped in more appropriately with the licensed fixed wireless. Licensed by rule is being handled in our data as unserved unless there's another technology reported at the location, because it's fitting in with some of the same limitations you see with unlicensed fixed wireless on interference and that type of thing. So there was no perfect solution with this, but there's a lot of variables that go into consideration for these. And so you'll probably see some more information about this as we go forward in the program. If we go to the next slide, though, we'll be talking about the next step that takes place once those eligible locations that factor in the reported availability, the funded areas, and those data modifications, once those are posted publicly on our CAB planning tool, there'll be a protest process where the internet service providers specifically will review that data using access to the licensed location level information. And then we'll be seeking submissions from them regarding the eligibility locations there. That's step one. Then later in the program, like at a later date, they'll kind of have another chance to do the same thing, but specifically to the county in which a project scope for CAB has been posted, in case there have been any last minute changes or something that was missed in the first round of protest. So that will be giving instructions and data templates to internet service providers for that. And counties are also invited to review these eligible areas and inform their prioritization, as well as to pursue availability challenges if you notice any data in our eligibility layer that doesn't line up with the lived experience in parts of the county. I want to give Angie a moment to talk about this slide as well. If you had anything to add, Angie, on this.
I think I'm good. I would just stress that, with our Great Grant program, the protest process happens during when we receive an application, we're required to post it, and we can receive protests on locations within that application. We're trying to move the protest process to the front end now because to be honest, that's our preference of us. I think the providers, the counties, it saves time. We can all agree on the locations before we receive bids. And just to stress, we are in a very different space than with our Great Grant projects, because when that program was launched, we didn't yet have broadband serviceable locations. So we didn't have individual location data. Now that we do, I mean, our hope is that it should be accurate, right? So the last round of FCC data was released right before Thanksgiving, that providers are reporting the status of every individual location. And so it is a very different space. That's what we will publish with the data modifications Stephanie Jane mentioned. I do want to say to Deborah's question in the chat, we can't really protest protected areas in the sense that those are not necessarily areas that are supposed to have service yet. Those are just areas where an award has been made, and providers are obligated to build there. So it's a little bit different. Yeah, so we're trying to handle protected areas as one process, protests as a separate process. I think that's all I have, Stephanie Jane.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And just as Angie was saying, there is very recent data now. We're getting very frequent updates from FCC's data, but there could be build out that's more recent. We want to have the freshest data possible for you to work from and for us to partner over. And in case there are any unintentional errors that we can address or anything like that. But if it's, I just put a note here because in future rounds of programs, there may be an allowance for planned service that is documented and fully committed, but that is not coming into play for this round of the program. So if any protest is submitted, it would need to be about service that is already built and lit and serving citizens today. Let's go to the next slide if we could. Thanks, Crystal. I wanted to tell you a little bit about these new Amazon Web Services folders that we've set up for receiving data securely from you and input on the CAB program. This allows your data contacts to send us information securely just using the internet browser on the computer. And every internet service provider across the state, as well as every county across the state, will have their own secure private folder with credentials to sign in. And we will also be providing a shared resources folder where we can provide templates and instructions and that kind of thing to make them really handy to access, especially if updates are made using this same platform. So what we could really use from your leadership, your offices, would be helping us to identify the correct data contacts at your county for communicating information about CAB and about your county's priority areas, anything that you'd like to prioritize in the scopes of work for the CAB projects. So if you could make note to send us your data contact's name, email, and phone number to broadbandmapping@nc.gov. that would be a great place to start, or have that person email us directly to that email address. And we will then issue credentials to that person for sending information to us and accessing the shared resources folder. So I think that about covers that. If we want to go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the priority areas that we'll be creating using those folders and just in-person communication that has already been ongoing with Jeff Brooks and others. So these priority areas, I've got kind of a sample image here. This is actually an image of where fiber infrastructure is reported in Chowan County. But if you use your imagination, this is similar to what it may look like as we hear from counties about different things that are important to address on broadband access within their counties. And so you could imagine we may get input on some counties where a certain quadrant of the county is high priority. So this is sort of like southwest quadrant of this county, or along a certain roadway is having a lot of issues, or along a waterway, or it could be a part of the county that is has disparities in resources or is disadvantaged in some ways that you're really trying to address it, whether it be educational attainment or employment or income, or the agricultural sector is really critical for some of our counties. You know, whatever you want to have an eye to, here's an opportunity to coordinate with the Broadband Infrastructure Office, and together we come up with prioritized areas. If the county is participating in CAB but is not in a position to highlight particular areas, then the eligible locations within that entire county will probably weigh a little more equally across the county. And we're still working on our criteria for evaluation. But what's important to take away from this slide is that the scopes of work for the CAB program will really focus on any priorities that county leadership has that they coordinate on with our office. We will have CSV files with the resulting eligibility layers and indications of their inclusion in these priority areas available for the internet service providers to download, or anyone else with a license to get at that location level data. But then we'll also be aggregating these areas for display in these small hexagons like you see here. And that is there's numbers for the sizes of hexagons. These are H3, what's called level 8 hexagons. And if you're familiar with the national broadband map, those are the same size hexagons that are the most specific ones and smallest ones available for download when you download broadband availability data. Each of those hexagons has its own ID number. So that is a good way of communicating back and forth with the public and with anyone working on CAB that doesn't have a license to access the location level data. So I'll explain a little bit more about the priority areas in the next slide. You have kind of a range of options. Crystal, if you want to go to the next slide, I think we have a little bit more detail about what you and the counties can share. You can give us a CSV file if you have a license to this BSL data, the CostQuest broadband serviceable locations. You can share CSV files of those, or you can share hexagons of interest. That those hexagons are visible in the map, but they're also a downloadable layer from NC1 Maps. So you'll be able to take that data into your own GIS software and work with it if you want to share that way. Or you can work with us to to provide a narrative describing your priority areas. And we can provide technical assistance to reflect that in a map at the location and hexagon level. So we'll have some templates available for that, some more specific instructions, and the web folders that we're using. And we'll be finalizing this in partnership with your county leadership. And then we will be asking for kind of a final sign off or approval by county leadership, just to ensure that we have understood correctly and everyone is satisfied with the priority areas as they stand before we publish them publicly and go to the next steps in the program. And the next step at that point, if you go to the next slide, would be the internet service providers responding to those scopes of work that result from that coordination process and gets posted online. So once that is available publicly, then internet service providers who were vetted early on, as Angie described, to be capable of participating in these programs in these counties, will be sending us location level data where they are proposing to address these eligible locations and build service to them, especially the prioritized areas designed by the counties. We'll be providing them with templates and instructions and aggregating to the hexagon level. So even for county leaderships or other stakeholders who don't have access to licenses for the location level data, we'll still be able to see what's being proposed and on particularly the partnerships and contacts that we're working with on the projects. The internet service providers, when we met with them Friday, and we'll be continuing to communicate this to them, we've let them know it's advantageous for them to reach as many eligible locations within those prioritized scopes of work, that's really going to matter in their proposals, as well as making an effort to reach any eligible location within a given hexagon for as many hexagons as they can in their proposed areas, so that we're not picking some and leaving some and creating a Swiss cheese effect. Okay, so that's going to be helpful to them and to all of us as we're trying to get access to everyone. Lastly, I just wanted to start putting on your radar the next steps. So Crystal, if you go to the next slide, here's where we've got some information about a very next step would be a great way to participate by joining the webinar that's this week on Friday. And that webinar is specifically about the steps you can take to get the no cost licenses that are available for accessing this location level data. There's no fee for doing it. It just takes time to go through a number of different steps to get the license. And so as county leaders, you will be interested in the Tier E license available. And this webinar on Thursday at 11 will go over the steps to get the license and help describe the ways you can use the data when you have this license. There have been some licenses available that help counties and internet service providers and state governments to participate in making the FCC's map better. Some of you may have gone through the process to get one of those licenses, and that is likely not the same license that we're talking about here. An additional license that expands the allowable uses of that proprietary location level data is the Tier E license that we're talking about here. And we're able to help with tech support if you need it on getting those licenses, but joining this webinar would be a great way to find out all you need to know on doing that. And we will be recording the presentation for anyone who's not able to join, especially if you haven't identified the best data contacts that you want to be working with this data on. So Angie's going to actually talk about further next steps beyond Thursday's webinar.
Thanks, Stephanie Jane. If we go to the last slide, please. Well, first, I just want to say we appreciate you all being on. I know this is a lot of information. To be honest, we get overwhelmed and we work in this every day. And I just want to kind of stress that as a county, you have an option as to how engaged, how much you want to take on. Not everyone has to get a Cost Plus license. You're welcome to if you want that. So it's just, there's kind of an array of engagement that you can have. So I just want to stress that, and we're here to work with you. So the items that we've talked about today, we need to publish this in our, again, update our CAB guidance. We are working on that. And so that's posted at ncbroadband.gov/CAB. We will be getting an email out hopefully this week to broadband providers to point to this new funded areas map. And we call it funded. Sometimes we say funded areas, sometimes we say protected areas, because there's this nuance, right? Just because it's a funded area, it's probably protected. It's possible there could be some funded area that doesn't have meet the right criteria, that's not protected. So that's why you may hear us using different language. But verifying these areas, making sure we have the correct data. We do have, as we've mentioned, we do have the federal areas from the FCC. We've obviously got the state areas, but it's just making sure that, we believe that these two parcels were included, and a broadband provider might say, well, we need to make sure the data is, since we're working at the location level, is exact. So that's where we are with that. As Stephanie Jane mentioned, finalizing the CAB eligible locations map. So once that's posted and up, we'll open the statewide protest process for CAB in the coming weeks. We will have one more webinar on Monday, December 18th. And again, so I think what we'll do is take the questions that we have in this chat and work to address those more in that session. So it'll be kind of a combination of answering what we feel like you all have asked for clarification on, and providing some more programmatic updates. And if you have questions, we're trying to use these email addresses. So broadbandmapping@nc.gov for mapping questions. That goes to Stephanie Jane and Ben. Program questions should be going now to cabprogram@nc.gov. And again, that's because we are bringing in more resources into these teams. And so we'd like to use these kind of standardized program email addresses. So those are the next steps. And again, we know it's a lot, but we thought it's best to push all this out, let y'all absorb it, and then we will work with you more on individual questions and next steps.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We will be posting the webinar and slides out at ncbroadband.gov/CAB. Thank you again. Have a great day. Bye-bye.